Hello everyone, welcome back to Anime Oracles, and today's video is about 86. This is going to be an overall analysis of the content of 86's first volume, so needless to say it's going to have spoilers for basically the entire first cour of the anime. That is the first 11 episodes in this case, so if you don't want to be spoiled too much, I suggest you skip the video for now and watch the anime first. Alright, without further ado, let's dive into 86. 86 is an award-winning Japanese light novel series authored by Asato with illustrations from Shirabi. It's published by Dengeki Bunko, and in case you didn't know, this is the same publishing company responsible for a lot of hit titles like A Certain Magical Index, Iseo, Bakano, Durara, and many more. Let's start with the basic premise. The visuals make it clear enough that it's a military-based science fiction with mecha elements, but considering the serious themes it incorporates into the story, there is a lot to talk about. It features a sort of semi-apocalyptic setting, and it's a science fiction mainly due to the introduction of two story elements. First one being the Legion, and the second one, an interesting piece of communications technology known as Paroride. We'll look into both of them in more detail later. It's a drama, or rather a military drama, which uses serious issues like racial discrimination in the central conflict, and it is employed to drive the plot element. The way the portrayal is done is actually quite realistic, and that's something I really appreciate. It takes inspiration in a pretty profound manner from Germany during the World War II era, and this is acknowledged by the author herself in the afterword. The main conflict got initiated when the Empire of Giad, a country that boasts military supremacy, and the eastern neighbor of the Republic of San Magnolia, decided to attack all the other parts of the continent in perhaps an attempt to take over the entire continent. The Empire had developed different types of autonomous drones collectively known as the Legion, which basically gave them a terrifying advantage as they had basically ensured they didn't have to deploy flesh and blood humans as troops in this battlefield. This leads to a menacious development as the Legion can self-replicate and are equipped with artillery and other weaponry powerful enough to subdue just about any army. And so, the Republic's armed forces were annihilated in only half a month, and the remaining personnel were left with no other choice but to employ desperate stalling tactics to somehow try and impede an inevitable invasion. Spurred on by the devastating situation, the Republic decided two things. First, they evacuated and moved the population of the Republic to their 85 administrative sectors. Second, they labeled all the people who weren't part of the majority race as Colorata and stated that they were progeny of the Empire. With the derogatory term in place, they decided to strip away their civilian rights. In doing so, they actually went against the five-hued flag, the very foundation on which their country was based and their constitution was written. The Alba were labeled the superior race since they were born into the country and were the founders, and the people of seemingly barbaric descent, that is the Colorata, were persecuted. They were sent to internment camps outside the 85 sectors. Their belongings and property were confiscated by the government for the construction of the Grand Mur, the wall that shields the 85 sectors. While initially some Alba did oppose the law just like the Colorata did, the movement soon died down. The government framed the Colorata as the ones responsible for their defeat at the hands of the Empire, claiming that they did spy work and brought about this result. This is actually a bullshit narrative given the law spared the Alba who were originally from the Empire but didn't spare the Colorata who weren't from the Empire. This goes to show that the policy stems from nothing but blatant discrimination. Unfair treatment for a certain section of the population based on eugenics was far easier for the Alba to accept than facing the reality that their country was in fact losing due to inferior military strength. They chose to blame all their frustrations on the Colorata, calling them pigs in human form. And despite claiming to be superior to the Empire, they failed to innovate and come up with an unmanned drone that could withstand live combat with the Legion, so they eventually stooped even lower. They introduced manned drones which were to be piloted by the persecuted population, all the while stating that they are unmanned. Since the 86 aren't considered human, the people who pilot these war machines are labeled processors, and their deaths aren't counted. They are assigned numbers and aren't even allowed names. Every day, the technological development of the Republic is praised and a narrative is parroted that they have achieved an incredible feat of no casualties in the battlefield, while in reality the persecuted population were dying every single day. The discriminatory practices brought about a situation where an unfathomable sense of disparity got created in how the people were treated simply because of their race. The Alba chose to ignore the reality of the situation, believed the government's narrative, and chose to live in paradise while thrusting the entire burden of war onto the 86. I'm sure the parallels with Germany in World War II era are clear enough from the explanation. The practices employed are very similar. The corrupt government chose to introduce tyrannical policies to scapegoat the minority, and the masses accepted those atrocious reforms to monopolize the limited resources. And like any realistic scenario, in the midst of it all, there are some people who know it's wrong and do nothing to oppose it. We'll get to such conflicts in a bit. Deciding to use the term 86 for the persecuted population was a pretty fitting choice from an author standpoint. Given in real life, the definition of 86 is literally to eject someone or throw someone out or even discard someone. Very appropriate since the Colorata were literally ejected from the administrative 85 sectors. The conflicts in this series are kind of similar to Attack on Titan, especially when we enter into the Marley story arc. Let's focus on the central characters. The book features a dual protagonist setup. Before diving into their respective characterization, I'd like to say that I like the designs very much. Not only are the characters good looking and well proportioned, but also the dynamic between them is already hinted at in the design itself. Shin and Lena have red and blue color schemes respectively. In terms of tonal value, Shin's overall design leaning towards a darker tone and Lena in contrast has a lighter one. They are meant to serve as each other's foils in the narrative and both have quite a bit of depth to them. In general, thought given into color schemes for character designs is something I really appreciate because they help establish a sense of contrast as well as make it easier to notice parallels between the characters from the get-go. I like how in the very first pages the two of them are making different hand gestures and this statement is added that corresponds to their respective conflicts. The story is told from both of their perspectives and it gives the audience a holistic perspective, showing the state of things inside and outside the Grand Mer. Shin, full name Shine Nozen, is from a noble bloodline. He has blood-red eyes and jet black hair, the traits he inherited because of his mixed yet noble lineage. He is the leader of the Spearhead Squadron, a group of elites fighting on the front lines in the battle against a legion. He is well regarded among his peers, having the nickname Trusty Reaper, and he has a stoic persona. He is an elite with unparalleled battling skills, and as such, he is always left behind as the rest of his squad perishes. This has been happening ever since he joined the military. That's why the others made a promise with him. Since the 86 aren't allowed graves, he would remember them and carry them to their final destination. For them, that is their only salvation, and Shin dutifully carries out his end of the promise. When someone dies, he retrieves a small fragment of their Juggernaut and carves their real names on it. He preserves them along with the rest of the people who died ever since he enlisted and vows to carry them to their final destination. There's also actually a sinister reason as to why this practice has more meaning than just sentimental value, and we'll get to that when we discuss the more horrifying reveals about the Legion. Lena, full name Vladlina Milize, a pure-blooded Alba, is one of the rare people who doesn't share the same opinions about 86 as her peers. Her father was greatly opposed to this artificial divide and she developed a similar mindset. She serves in the military and is brilliant enough to get promoted to the position of major at just 16 years of age. She serves as handler to the 86 processors. A handler is someone who oversees the military operations of 86 and, to put it bluntly, has the duty of monitoring them. They handle the processors, although most of them simply shirk their duties. She gets assigned as the handler of the infamous Spearhead Squadron, that is Shin's squadron, shortly as the story begins. The reorganizations of handlers and processors is a pretty common phenomenon since the units frequently face losses to the point that combat would be impossible, so they are shuffled around and transferred to different squadrons from time to time. The Spearhead Squadron being infamous actually builds a sort of intrigue in the story. What exactly do they do that some people even resort to suicide? And so with this setup, the character interactions get initiated. The characterization of the supporting cast is done in small portions, but it is succinct. We get a brief view of their conflicts and struggles, and it contributes to the overall narrative in a meaningful manner. From the 86 side of things, we have Raiden, Kurena, Anju, and Theo. From Lena's side, we have Annette. As Lena starts with her duties, the regular operations commence with subtle information being thrown here and there. For some reason, the 86 make their way into the battlefield and take up strategic positions even before they receive any official alert. On the other hand, the 86 are surprised to note that Lena, unlike the other handlers, actually went through Shin's 5-year-old copy-pasted patrol report and asked him to actually tediously write down all of them. This initiates some decent surface level exchanges between the two parties. The 86 low-key understand that Lena isn't actually a bad person, or however they do realize that she is terribly naive when she narrates the story about her getting rescued by a Colorata in the past, when her father took her to the battlefield, and how the words of this 86 soldier played a huge role in motivating her to work towards the position she holds today, and how she intends to help the 86. Her idealistic and simplistic view from a privileged position of this complex and brutal world clearly showed just how out of touch she was from reality. So they repeatedly warn her that she isn't fit for the job, and this is made clear enough in the first turning point of the story. Kae, the girl who asked Lena to quit being their handler, gets killed, and this happens due to negligence on part of the previous handlers not providing the squadron with proper maps of the terrain. Lena blames herself for not being able to give them the information on time, even after she painstakingly dug them out of the archives. This rattles Theo, whose outburst leaves Lena shaken. Unlike the soldier who saved Lena and said it was their duty to serve the Republic, the vast majority of 86 don't share the same views. They aren't fighting out of a sense of duty, they are doing it because that's the only option left to them. It's either military enlistment and death in the battlefield or a life of slavery. Lena, despite her claims that she doesn't endorse the views of the Republic, subconsciously ended up showcasing similar behavior as the rest of her peers in a subtle way. It's hypocritical to say you see someone as human yet never ask for their names. This subtle detail is actually critical when you realize she even asked for the cat's name in the 86 barracks but not the people. She participated in this dehumanizing act without even realizing it. The 86's personal files are discarded and their real names are never acknowledged. They are deprived of it. The situation forces her to realize that kind words and tactical support aren't enough to bridge the gap between them when their positions and roles are so different. She is the oppressor and they are oppressed. She is sitting safely behind the walls while the 86 are forced to fight for their lives. Her father too had showcased hypocrisy when he took Lena to the battlefield. He never even realized that he thought that only the 86 actually die on the battlefield. And he somehow thought the Alba wouldn't face such a tragic fate even if they openly flew into dangerous airspace. Such naivety and subconscious sense of security led him to do the unthinkable and put the life of his own daughter at peril. This development in the volume signals the end of the superficial interactions between the two parties and leads to a path of more honest exchanges between Lena and the Spearhead Squadron. To a certain extent, a genuine connection develops. As we progress further in the story, this sets Lena up for some great character development. She starts off as this naive girl with a savior complex, and she evolves into this fearless young lady who is uncompromising in her ideals even when no one is lending her support. There are anti-establishment themes surrounding Lena's character. This brings us to the other protagonist, Shin. From his perspective, we actually see the horror elements becoming more prominent in the story. He resides in the 86 barracks along with the Spearhead Squadron. The anime did well to showcase the stark contrast in the living conditions of the two protagonists. I really like how well defined the difference in depiction is of the central statue of the Republic versus the one painted in the walls in the military barracks. The horror elements of the story show up with the introduction of the Black Sheep, one type of unit in the several different categories of Legion. This segment basically explains why the Spearhead Squadron is so infamous among handlers, and why most of them either quit or request for reshuffling, and some of them even commit suicide when they are assigned to the squadron. They experienced what is known as wailing of the dead. Remember when I mentioned there's a much more sinister reason as to why most of the 86 soldiers made that promise with Shin? Well, here it is. Once a Republic Juggernaut unit falls, the Legion gathers the neural circuits of the dead 86 and integrate it into their system. I know, right? This is like something straight out of a horror novel. So every time an 86 soldier dies on this battlefield of machines, it's not just a matter of loss on an emotional and military personnel level. It also strengthens the enemy. The Giadian Empire actually created mechanical monsters who are capable not only of autonomous thought, but also they are capable of intellectual evolution and self-preservation. The 86 would much rather end themselves on the battlefield and have Shin carry them over to their final destination than be trapped in a mechanical body in a thematic sense and become a Legion. The central processor of the Legion is based on the human brain, so they come with an expiry date that has been estimated as 2 years by the Republic. The main catch here is, if the processors of the Legion are going to halt their functioning, all they have to do is replace them. And thanks to the Republic Revoking the rights of the 86 to even get graves, the Legion get the brains in ample supply. But even assimilating partially damaged brains would help them outlive their natural lifespan. This brings up the question as to what would happen if the Legion got their hands on an undamaged brain. And that's where the core conflict of Volume 1 comes in, and where all the storylines of the key players intersect. Diving into Shin's side of things, he and his brother were taken in by a priest while their father decided to enlist to protect their family. But after the notification came that he had died on the battlefield, their mother decided to enlist as well. The government forced their hand, making empty promises that if they fought, their family would gain back their civilian rights. Both their parents dying left Ray Nozen, Shin's brother, feeling a terrible sense of despair, and this led him to take out all his frustrations on his brother, almost strangling him to death, blaming him for their parents' death, labeling him a sin. This leaves an indelible mark and strains the relationship between the two of them and sets up Shin's character arc. Shin is shown to be obsessed in the pursuit of his brother, to fight and kill him, to the point that he shows a sense of madness every time he mentions his brother. In fact, he even forgets about his comrades during this brief period of psychological elation. The primary reason why the Spearhead Squadron is able to intercept the Legion even before any alert is even issued is because Shin can hear the mechanical wailing of the dead, and because of this he can pinpoint Legion location. Ever since his brother strangled him, Shin had been able to hear the mechanical voices of the dead. He thematically died that day even if he was physically saved at the last moment. I really like how skillfully the author has connected the two brothers in a conflict using the symbolism of necks, and this ties so well with Shin's own title of Reaper and the crest on his Juggernaut, the headless skeleton. Well, technically it's his brothers. There's a story behind the symbol and it's connected to the fairy tale Ray used to narrate to Shin. Ray's character connection to the symbolism of heads is quite literally him losing his head and being made into a ghost commander of the Legion, a shepherd, which leads to the third act of the story in this volume. It's very interesting how the story shows Shin and Lena's interactions with Ray under very different circumstances, and both coming to different conclusions based on the temperament he shows. Shin was always protected by his brother, but the strangling incident led him to question all of it and conclude that his brother had fallen into despair and took out all his frustrations on him. It parallels with how the Republic was losing and had taken their frustrations out on the minority or the weak. It's flawed human nature in display and the root cause of the discriminatory practices being showcased both on a macro and micro scale. To further dive into why exactly Shin can listen to the voices of the dead, let's look at the Pararade. It's a unique piece of technology that basically enables telepathic communication. According to the book, the technology allows them to link sensory information and even conveys emotions to a certain extent. Since it functions via the collective unconscious, it's a long-range communication device that's immune to jamming. The catch here is, this impressive piece of technology was actually inspired by already existing psychic abilities that were displayed by a certain family. The kids and their mother could tell each other's emotions without directly talking. This fascinating occurrence was noted by their friend, who was actually Annette's father and a researcher. As the narrative has already made clear by now, the boy was actually Shin and his family. When the Republic announced the reforms, that's when things got complicated. First, Annette got bullied at school for being friends with Shin, who they referred to as a stain. Feeling immensely hurt and disgusted at this turn of events, when Shin approached her, being oblivious of all this, she lashed out. When her father was conflicted and asked whether they should shelter the family, she refused. This is a prime display of human weakness and where the narrative clearly shows how Lena differs from the other Alba who also aren't in agreement with the Republic's treatment of the non-Alba section of the populace. Lena admittedly having the most childish approach and understanding of the situation of the three initially, which is especially showcased in this scene in the anime where she got up to lecture students about the bigoted views they were being fed as facts and the rubbish that was being announced every single day. As expected, her words were discarded without much thought, and she even received scorn for attempting to misinform the student. Both Carl Stull and Annette had more information than Lena, but they had submitted to despair and kept telling themselves absolutely nothing could be done. Carl Stull had convinced himself that protecting the people of the Republic is something he had to do, so he even resorted to assigning missions that would lead all 86 to their deaths, and this would essentially erase the atrocities done by the Alba from the history, thereby saving the Republic from the fate of being seen by the world as oppressors. Actually, this agenda is probably made obvious the moment we see that Shin's mother was forced to enlist so that her family could stay safe. No matter how many people enlisted and died for the sake of protecting their families, in the 9-year-old history since these reforms, no one actually ever got any Republic citizenship. If you ponder as to why, then I think this particular agenda of eradicating all the 86 becomes pretty clear. Annette psychologically limited her own agency in the situation. In this situation created by the artificial divide, she made only the bare minimum attempts and was relieved when those attempts failed. She had fixed her mindset on the belief that she was powerless so much that Lena's straightforwardness and stubbornness irritated her, which leads her to reveal the horrifying truth about the para-raid and also claim that Lena too is responsible for what's happening to the 86. The Republic's decision-making is atrocious in this regard, but what Lena did is supposedly worse, because her support kept them alive and now they have been ordered to die. The Republic wanted results, so they put safety as barely a priority in order to develop the para-raid. The reveals here help Lena in connecting the dots and discover that Shin is actually Annette's childhood friend. This is a piece of information that Lena eventually exploits to provide support to the 86 via the mortar during their suicide mission. Trapping the vestiges of someone's existence in a metal body, their final and excruciating thoughts being played over and over again. That's the end result of being taken by the Legion. In a thematic sense, they are ghosts, unable to move on, just like the Legion themselves, rogue creations carrying out the wills of their former masters. In fact, it ties very well with the Republic too, since the Alba have decided to abandon their ideals from the five-hued flag. They are essentially a failed example of a democracy sitting in ignorance in an impermanent paradise, until the very lives they threw under the bus would become the driving factor behind their demise. It's poetic justice and just reaffirms the saying, as you sow, so you reap. Now people might be wondering, why exactly did the 86 not take revenge or plan a revolution at least for their fellow 86? Well, let's not forget, first and foremost, they are only children. Children who have lost their parents, their childhood, aspirations, and as mentioned before, their civilian rights. They have minefields at their backs and the menacing Legion on the front. Therefore, all they can do is survive. And whenever the 86 survive for too long, they are sentenced to death by being deployed for a hopeless mission. The 86 adults died in the war or were worked to death. Babies perished because of no medical care or were sold off, and they aren't allowed to reproduce. The Republic had simply set out to wipe away their existence. They find the idea of a revolt to be a wasted effort since it would accomplish nothing. The Alba wouldn't feel sorry for their actions. They'd just act as victims, plus more importantly, the 86 aren't really naive. They know full well that not all Alba are bad, and not all 86 are good. Raiden was given shelter by an old woman. Shin was raised in a church by an Alba priest after his family got sent to the internment camps. They have seen cruelty from both sides. All they truly want is to be remembered and to fight for their pride. So revenge is futile from their perspective. They want to do their absolute best to survive and be free. They want to at least be able to die on their own terms. In fact, if you look into some real-life accounts of people who were persecuted during the many cruel times of our own history, including the famous diary of Anne Frank, you will see that people have their own way of dealing with such situations and finding meaning in their struggles. The 86 have pride, and that's all they have, and that's what they have been fighting for since the very beginning. They don't care about the Republic in the slightest, but being able to survive day after day with their brothers in arms holds meaning for them. Striving to survive against all odds and struggling to be free is what they're aiming for. Just because they have been thematically sentenced to death doesn't mean they can't march to their death with their head held high. It's their definition of freedom, them finally being able to make a choice. Like other reviewers have mentioned, what I really found to be brilliant in this story is Asato's sense of dramatic pacing and her knack for timing her reveals. The conflict is linked with many characters in a very succinct and credible manner, and the structure keeps the reader, or in case of the anime, the viewer, engaged as the reveals and information gets imparted to the reader and the central characters at the same time, keeping the reader thoroughly invested in the story. The political backdrop, harrowing practices of the Republic, and the development of the characters are handled with care. The anime actually did a brilliant job. They actually adapted content from the recently released volume 10 of 86. Despite the disturbing elements and themes getting touched in the story, it never fails to convey that at its core it's a story of standing up to despair to achieve something meaningful. The world building also has been carefully laid out, which we see at the end of the volume when the Federal Republic of Giad shows up. The first volume can be easily considered a full story while also laying out the groundwork for later volumes. A1 Pictures has been doing a brilliant job of adapting 86. I especially like how they took advantage of the difference in perspectives between Lena and the 86. There are in fact multiple instances of dialogues and scenes contrasting themselves. I especially like the one where Lena was reflecting on Theo's outburst, and the scene also plays the narrative the Republic parrots all the time and how it contrasts with the perspective of the 86 that Theo represents. There's also a scene where the gruesomeness of the battlefield that the 86 were describing was being paralleled with the Alba enjoying meals or enjoying a carefree time. Lena taking in both sides of the story and seeing contradictory scenarios being described simultaneously made her nauseous. Many visual cues are used in the anime, and it's been done in a very subtle manner. For example, that small scene where Kurena refused to resonate with Lena, which showed her disapproval. That very memorable scene where Shin was gazing into the mirror while whispering to his brother. The crack in the mirror visually coincides with the scar on Shin's neck and thereby conveying the core conflict between them. Lena snapping Ray out of his madness with the duds, which is thematically shown as a slap to the face. The way the fireworks at the 86 barracks and the fireworks in the middle of the battlefield are shown. Both scenes convey a sense of nuance, essentially the fireworks in the most terrifying and happy sense of the word. Coming to the parodied communications technology, which is technically pseudoscience, I'd say it's not completely unfounded from a real-life viewpoint either. Real-life science has concluded that thoughts have frequency based on the vibration imbibed in them by the human mind. The thoughts range from alpha thoughts, beta thoughts, to delta thoughts. And spiritual practices like meditation have been cited as being capable of restructuring the mind to create more delta thoughts. In fact, there have been actual studies and experiments that have been trying to bridge the gap between people via new and innovative man-machine interfaces and even mind-to-mind communications using neurotechnology. So it's safe to say that whether intentional or not, the technology showcased in this story definitely has some basis in reality. I'll attach the relevant links in the description below in case you want to look more into them. But as far as the two major elements that make this a science fiction story are concerned, the Legion and the Parade, both systems are actually quite well crafted and they contribute well to the story. Let's talk about the harbingers of destruction in this series, the Legion. First, let us consider the definition of Legion. Legion primarily means a division of 3,000 to 6,000 men, including a complement of cavalry in the ancient Roman army. And it's also a biblical reference. To complement something means a thing contributes extra features to something else in such a way as to improve or emphasize its quality. This name is very apt if you consider the primary formation of the Legion. There are various categories of Legion, all apt for different forms of combat and tactical warfare. If you look at some meaningful quotes from Sun Tzu's book, Art of War, especially these ones, he will win whose army is animated by the same spirit throughout all its ranks. He will win who has military capacity and is not interfered with by the sovereign. The Legion embody exactly these values and also possess the means to augment themselves by assimilating human neural circuits. They are that formidable because of their terrifying mobility, firepower, numbers, versatility, and ability to evolve and survive. They are actually systematic with their approach. Even their most basic strategy involves jamming enemy communications using the Eintagsfliege and then using long-range bombardment or whatever is necessary to bring down the enemies. It seems the Legion have been designed taking inspiration from Stephen King's The Mist. Even discarding the entire story element about the black sheep, the insectoid shapes themselves innately induce a sense of horror. Given this is a military sci-fi, there's quite a lot of focus on exposition, but from a reader perspective, this does not prove too cumbersome. I do agree that certain battle scenarios can be hard to visualize with all the technical terms being thrown around for those unacquainted with them, but since the anime is airing right now, one could always refer to it. It acts as a great supplementary material. The origin of Legion names are also quite interesting. Not only is a huge part of the conflict inspired from German history, but almost all of the technical terms for the Legion are also inspired from the German language. Amaze means ants, Grauwolf means a common wolf, the Dinosauria obviously refers to a dinosaur. The einsteined flesh, as we have seen before, refers to a certain sort of insect. The names reflect their core functionality and provide a good sense of structure for naming convention. Although that's par the course for Japanese media, I'd say, since they in general tend to be quite particular with names. You can especially see it in RPGs. In fact, as a teaser of sorts, we'll even see some machinery based on lore in future volumes. I think Asato did a very good job of showing us a tireless yet formidable foe. The horror elements and the way human conflict can be tied onto them using the concept of the black sheep and shepherds make for some pretty compelling conflicts. At its core, this series is about setting aside one's differences and speaking up against the unreasonable world to attain one's freedom. Both Shin and Lena's storylines for the first arc showcase a nuance to the concept of freedom. They both shattered their psychological shackles, Lena breaking free of her naivety and even resorting to manipulative actions to get the job done. Shin freeing himself and his brother from the sorrow and resentment the actions of the Republic had inflicted upon their family. Altogether, there's a lot to learn from this story, and the best part is, this is just the first volume. Thank you so much for watching. Don't forget to give a thumbs up if you liked the video and subscribe for future content. Have a nice day.